Hello and welcome to this Microsoft Office 365 webinar. My name is Richard. I'm one of the Cloud Solutions Specialists here at Byte Software Services. In this session, I wanted to walk through Office 365 and its constituent components, better understanding what each one of those services does, the comparison between online and on-premise environments, and really give a holistic all-up view of what Office 365 can and can't do. The second half of this session, I really want to start exploring how do we take this journey from where we are today to the cloud. So what's that migration process going to look like? What's it going to take to get to Cloud Utopia? Without further ado, I wanted to set the scene about where Office 365 really sits within this cloud market, and no better way than to explain through this. As you see here on the left-hand side, we have our full on-premise environment. And what this is really saying is currently, today, we take ownership and management responsibility for absolutely everything from the tin and the server infrastructure that a solution sits on, all the way through to the application and user level. As we move into a cloud world, we actually split this into three defined areas where we have infrastructure as a service, providing bare bones tin. Now, often you'll see here that actually the operating system isn't highlighted by the vendor, but actually you may find that a vendor specifies what OS layer you choose, but actually, especially within the Microsoft solution, you get a greater choice there. As you look to platform, again, you're essentially asking your vendor to take on greater responsibility again and saying, actually, all I want to do is have configuration and capability around the application layer. So this is where essentially you would develop an application and you don't worry about what hardware or any of the back end that it would sit on. Now, software as a service, and that's really where we play today, is really looking more at the commoditized services. This is the gives and gets of the world, where we're saying we have a specific service, and we will consume that service, and for 99% of the people, that is going to fit the bill. And often I like to think about this in the sense that if I'm going to buy a suit, I could go down to Marks & Spencer's and buy a suit off peg, and that's really the software as a service proposition. You know, it's very commoditized. I know what it does and what it will give me, and you know what, for 99% of people, that's going to be perfect. There may actually be a time when that suit or that product isn't going to quite fit, in which case we need to start thinking more around infrastructure and platform as a service and where we can leverage those technologies. Infrastructure as a service and platform as a service are facilitated through Microsoft's Azure platform. This is the counterpart to Office 365 in Microsoft's cloud, and there is another session coming up around exactly what Microsoft Azure is and the gives and gets. Today we're going to concentrate on Office 365 and software as a service. So what is 365? Before we set off here, I want to go around each one of these individual components and just explain them a little greater. The first thing I'd like to say is that actually each one of these services does have a Plan 1 and Plan 2 offering. Now this is very much akin to what we have on premise as Standard and Enterprise. Let's start with Exchange. So Exchange is our messaging platform, and actually, you know what, this is still over 50% of Office 365 is still just catered for Exchange, and this really for me is because, you know, we as consumers, we've been hosting Exchange for a long time. It's not a great leap of faith for us to go to a public cloud offering and actually benefit from those economies of scale. So within Exchange Online, as absolute standard, we have things like a 50 gig mailbox. So each user is provisioned with a 50 gig mailbox. Now, we as admins, we have the granularity of control over that. We can start pulling that down to something that's a little bit more akin to what users have been experiencing today. But as default, Microsoft will provision that with a full 50 gig mailbox. On top of that, we have things like full active sync rights and protocols. So we can do a very lightweight management of mobile devices, but certainly things like we could turn off a camera, we can enforce a password needs to be set, we can do things like a remote device wipe, again, all from within Exchange. Now, I did say that there are two offerings there, the Standard and Enterprise, or Plan 1 and Plan 2 as we refer to it, and that's all absolutely baked in with Plan 1. Now, Plan 2 not only sees Microsoft's unified messaging platform being introduced, and really that's where we're taking our Exchange mailbox and turning our voicemail mailbox into that Exchange mailbox. So we can do things like transcribe what's left in a voicemail, all that kind of good stuff. Now, that's not often utilized. The piece that's really utilized in Plan 2 is actually the compliance archiving solution. So on top of this 50 gig mailbox, Microsoft are also providing an unlimited archive with an unlimited retention period that's fully e-discoverable and has full retention policies and things like that. So if we're considering journaling and archiving solutions, actually Microsoft already have that within the platform. There are some limitations with Office 365 and in particular Exchange Online. Now, often these limits will feel like soft limits. The one that's most people are concerned with, there is a 25 megabyte attachment size, and that's a hard stop maximum. The argument to that really is to say, you know what, if we're going to be sending mail or attachments larger than 25 megabytes, that we should really be thinking of a more collaborative environment in which to do that. And you know, we're going to talk about SharePoint and other facilities like OneDrive. That would certainly be the vehicle to deliver those. There are some other limits, and these tend to be a little bit softer. So things like we can only send 125 attachments per email. One of the ones is we can only send to 10,000 recipients a day, and you know, it may get to a stage where you think, well, actually, you know, that's still a lot of people. And if we ever had the need to increase that, there's a little workaround that would suggest, well, let's put those into a distribution group. Each distribution group only counts as one recipient. Also, just to mention, you can send as many emails to those 10,000 individuals as you like, but that is our limit on how many recipients we can send to. So like I said, those often feel like soft limits because we wouldn't consider doing those today. If we move on to SharePoint, so SharePoint Online, and I think about SharePoint Online as really facilitating the life cycle of a document. And by that I mean when I'm working on documents that are very much related to me, or I'm just creating those documents, I can replace that My Documents, or what's typically a user's P drive on a network drive, I can replace that storage in that environment with OneDrive or OneDrive for Business. And like I said, this is very much when a document is still in its incubation form. This is very much the personal view of the world. However, as I'm writing that document, I may need to get third-party input. So I may need one of my colleagues or perhaps a line manager or someone from a different department to start having input upon the document I had there. In which case, we then utilize SharePoint to create something like a project or a team site. These are browser-based versions. This is it's a browser experience, and we can start then having co-authoring. We can start having many other features within 365, within SharePoint itself, document control, version control, things like that. That can actually start facilitating a more collaborative experience. Once we've kind of got to this stage where we've now had a lot of people collaborating on this document, typically it then gets published in some shape or form. That could often be an intranet or a secure extranet, and again, SharePoint is our conduit to doing that. Now, the thing with SharePoint is we also wrap around services such like enterprise search. So the fast search engine has now been integrated into SharePoint 2013 and again on SharePoint Online. So we have this very feature-rich search engine built within SharePoint for us. We can also do things like Power BI and analytics there associated with the data we have, or even just use SharePoint as a presentation layer for many other services. Now again, I did say that there's Plan 1 and Plan 2, Standard and Enterprise. Each user still gets a 1 terabyte OneDrive storage, and that's irrespective. Each user also then contributes 500 megabytes of storage into the pooled storage. This is irrespective of Plan 1 and Plan 2. In this instance, Plan 1 and Plan 2 purely refers to the functionality. And we start seeing in Plan 2 things like the business connectivity services within SharePoint. And this is really the connectivity between SharePoint as a platform to a third party, could be a database. So we could say, for example, I have here an Oracle database on premise. What I want to do is present that data through SharePoint, and actually it's the business connectivity services that really facilitate that. Much like on premise, again, things like the analytics side of things, they're again very much baked within enterprise functionality. If we just have a consider about Lync, so Lync Online, this was the amalgamation of Live Meeting and Office Communication Server, and Lync's been with us for a good 3 or 4 years now. Now, Lync for me facilitates 3 things. The first piece is really around instant message and presence information. So this is the ability to see at a glance where and what my colleagues are doing within the organization. So I can understand if a colleague is on a phone call, away from their desk, what have you. And then be able to engage in chat or instant message type facilities between each other. And really what this tends to be is more quick question, could you help me out with this document or something like that. Typically the fear is that people will start replacing the typical water cooler or photocopier conversation with link and having more of a chat around personal. And actually I found, certainly within my experience, people still like to go and have that chat by the water cooler. That actually we find link tends to be the replacement for those short emails we send each other. So instead of me having to write, oh, hi, Steve, really good to see you. I just wanted to, I'm just writing a document. I just wanted to see if you could give me a hand on this, that, and the other. Anyway, all the best. If you could get back to me, thanks. Many thanks, Richard. Instead of having to go through that long process, we can then just engage very quickly. Steve, just writing this doc. What do you think about this, that, and the other? So absolutely, that's kind of bread and butter functionality for Link. What we then have, as we move out of that, if you think about the second thing that Link really does, and this is really providing video conferencing. And now, there are some granular differences between on-premise and online in this instance. So with online, we can have 250 simultaneous people or attendees viewing our conference or webinar or what have you. Now, on-premise, we have a wider scale there. We can have over 1,000 people. I think it's 1,025. But bear in mind, this is an auto-scaling codec there behind the video. So the idea is that actually we're providing the end user with the best possible experience. We can do whiteboarding, we can do things like sharing desktops, which actually comes very handy for support services and things like that. And it really means we can start recording webinars much like the one you see today, or we can start having video conferencing facilities both within the organization and externals. Now the third piece that Link really facilitates is the integration or replacement of enterprise voice. This is where we're saying I would either like to integrate to my existing PBX, or I would like to replace it with Link's VoIP engine. Now this is currently something we can't do online today, and the problem really there is about integrating into existing SIP trunks, or frankly replacing that functionality. This is currently something we can't facilitate with Link Online today. You may have read recently there is a new development that says Link Online will be replaced by something called Skype for Business. This is still coming down the road. This is going to be within the next 6 months or so. And we might start seeing some of that functionality start creeping in. But today, it's not currently available. Now, those three services are actually hosted within Microsoft's data centers, and this is a global network of data centers. Now, as European consumers, our primary data center would be based out of Dublin, and it's geo-redundant server, then out of Amsterdam. And these servers are hosted within those data centers. The reason for mentioning this, obviously, that does mean that Microsoft will be doing the maintenance, the management, the provisioning, and all that kind of good stuff. However, we have this last component here of Office. Now, Office is still, there's Office Professional Plus, and again, Office 2013. Much with the rest of these services, it's an evergreen service, so you will always have the latest and greatest version. But with Office, this is still a desktop installation, so it is still me having the installation media and pushing that down to a local machine. This is the Office Professional Plus package, so it does include absolutely everything. And actually, there are some other versions of Office that become interesting. So one of the key components between doing Office on-premise and Office through Office 365 is really how we license that product. So on-premise, we license a device for Office. So we say, actually, my desktop has to have a license, my laptop has to have a license, perhaps my tablet over RDS, that needs a license. And suddenly we're amassing a number of licenses for our devices. Now with Office 365 we're licensing a user, and what that actually means in reality is we have the ability to install up to 5 simultaneous x86 or desktop type machines. We can also add Office onto 5 tablets, whether that be Android or iOS, and we can have that onto 5 corporate mobile phone devices too, and our single license will cover us across all of those devices. The other piece to recognize here is that whilst that is still absolutely a desktop install or a local install to that device, there is a facility called Office Online, and this is a cut-down browser-based version of Word, OneNote, PowerPoint, and Excel, delivered through the browser. And these are actually becoming increasingly feature-rich. Again, these are typically services delivered through one of the Exchange, SharePoint, or Link products, as essentially that online server needs to be attached to one of those servers. One of the things we don't think about when we think about 365, we tend to forget the added value piece around 365, and we concentrate just on those four components. When actually, we can certainly mitigate the cost or the uplift to 365 by considering that actually, Microsoft are providing full AV and spam protection as part of this service. And this is 10 independent AV engines that are going to scan again every document inside and outside. Every time you download a document outside of SharePoint, that's going to be scanned too. And do you know what? It starts getting to the stage where we might be able to mitigate some of that cost by replacing our existing filtering or AV partner. We also have things like OneDrive, and again, we've discussed that in a high level, but OneDrive is a site collection within SharePoint, but that really gives us and our users a terabyte of storage per user, and actually, again, what's coming down the road within certainly the next few months, is that 1 terabyte limit is again being lifted. So soon, OneDrive will be facilitating each user with unlimited storage capability. And again, if you think about the cost of what that's taking for my network drives or for other third-party solutions around storage, we can certainly start seeing some cost benefit there too. We haven't mentioned Yammer. So Yammer is, it was an acquisition by Microsoft not too long ago, and this is really, and I hate myself for saying it, but this is actually the Facebook for the enterprise view of the world. This is where we'll certainly see a low barrier to adoption because it's something that we already use as a consumer, and actually it's our first entrance into enterprise social environments. So, and Yammer's again part of our Office 365 license. We talked about the archiving solution, again baked within our 365 license. So you can actually see, whilst we talk about those four constituent components, that often this ribbon on the package is of just as much value to us. One of the things we see here is rights management, and really what I want to do is take a little step back about what right management is and why we have it. This here is what Gartner and the likes of will refer to as the IT megatrends. These are supposed to be the four things that are on all of your minds. And really my point here is by saying, well, with Office 365, we're actually facilitating a number of these just through a single platform. And most importantly is mobility. By embracing Office 365, what we're saying is actually we will still be able to offer you that corporate experience, those services you're used to and rely on, whether you're using that desktop machine or whether you go home, whether you're on the road using a 3G connection or in the office using a hardwired connection. The idea is that we're providing that mobility to your users. Now, often mobility leads to a bring your own device conversation because, again, we're exposing that data and we're allowing access. And frankly, bring your own device then sends off alarm bells around data protection and data leakage and actually, am I securing my corporate data? And this is really where we tie this back into rights management. So Microsoft are aware of this. Microsoft fully appreciate that what we need to do is, whilst we're offering that mobility and offering that mobile experience, that we also need to make sure that data isn't being leaked to competitors and we're not losing that IP somehow. And rights management, again, is the absolute tool to support that. So rights management will encrypt data and essentially say, unless somebody has the credential to go and open it, they won't be able to go and open or edit that document. So using the same credentials as you would for Office 365, and often this is just provided on a pass-through, depending on your authentication type. This is often just pass-through, and you don't even notice it's there until you start using it on a non-corporate device or certainly on a third party, and they then will be prompted for credentials in order to open that document. So it's really nice just to see that we're actually starting to think around that wider strategy and how we then secure and support ourselves. Now, hopefully that'll give us a better understanding of what 365 is, some of those constituent components. And more importantly, it's, okay, well, that all sounds good, but how do I now get there? What's my journey going to look like? Now, I've defined this in 10 steps, and by no means is this comprehensive. There are certainly things around networking and things like that we haven't covered here, but certainly this will give us an idea. Obviously, in the first instance, we need to create an environment, or what Microsoft refer to as a tenant. So there are really two fundamental ways of doing this. There's obviously you can go and purchase that straight away, or we can send you through a proof of concept or a trial environment. Now, my only word of warning here is to say, if we send over a trial link, or you activate a trial, that actually the value of that trial is limited until we start using it in earnest, in live environments. It's much the same as, I could say, I could provide you with a Hotmail address or something like that, and you could have a look at it, but actually you won't start evaluating the capabilities unless we used it in real-world scenarios. So, yeah, just a point to think around there. So let's say we have this tenant, and now what do we need to do? Well, we need to start effectively trying to attach our corporate credentials to that environment. So Microsoft can have up to 900 domains. These are SMTP domains. We can add up to 900 domains to that Office 365 environment. So we want to start doing that as early as possible. Now, obviously, to make sure that we're not all saying we're Coca-Cola.com, there is a verification process here of that domain. It's a simple amendment to an A record down in your DNS settings. And so once that's done, we start having the beginning of our corporate credentials placed into 365. The next thing we need to do is consider how do we move those users and user objects into 365 and join up that piece. And in order to do that, we need to start thinking about doing a cleanup or a cleanse of our current directory, which really leads us on to how do we then facilitate single sign-on. Office 365 really has 3 different authentication methods, and the purpose of this slide is really to demonstrate actually we can have something completely siloed, but as the more we go towards an integrated identity solution, there is a greater level of effort needed, and we'll go into that as we go through. So a cloud identity, this is essentially where we have almost completely separate credentials. So whilst there may be the same email address, we certainly wouldn't have any unification over password policies and things like that. So these are very much 2 separate cloud identity versus your on-premise identity. And often people would argue this is only suitable for a smaller organization, or perhaps even somebody who doesn't utilize a directory store currently on-premise like Active Directory. So often not ideal for our working scenario. Synchronized identity, or synchronizing those identities to what we have on-premise to online, is really where we start seeing a lot of enterprise customers starting their journey. And this is really the introduction of something called DIRSync, or directory synchronization. What this is, it's a little server tool that takes a copy, it's like a one-way sync, taking all the objects out of your current AD and pumping them up to the Office 365 directory store. And what this is really doing is not only copying that user data, but also copying the passwords too. So meaning that whilst we are still authenticating in 2 places, so when we log into our domain in the morning, we're authenticating there, and when we want to get into a cloud service, we're still authenticating again. But we do have a unified password policy. So the same passwords, and effectively that sync happens every 4 hours. It's forced, so you can force it actually at any time, but it's also forced at any password change. So those 2 passwords and identities are still being kept in sync. This is going to work for people who perhaps who are maybe using a lot of the fat clients to access these services. So let's say, for example, you're just consuming mail data and you're going to use, let's say, Outlook for that. Often an organization might say, well, if I'm only consuming the email service through Outlook, actually it's going to locally cache those credentials anyway. I may only be prompted whenever I change that password. That's the only time I'm ever going to be prompted for a password, ergo this solution might be good for me. However, a lot of our customers also say, actually what I really want is really more like single sign-on federated identity. And this is really where we start saying, when I log into my directory in the morning, or log into my AD or my domain in the morning, it's going to provide pass-through authentication into my respective Office 365 services. And this really works through something called ADFS. This is Active Directory Federation Services. That was introduced in, I think, Windows Server 2008 R2 and above. So it's a little server role again, and what this is really doing is creates a trust between the ADFS service and the end service itself, in this case Office 365. And what we're saying here is, if a user hits me, the ADFS box, then you can trust that they've been authenticated and get passed through. And this really is where we start putting all the ownership and onus onto a single authentication process, often based on-prem. Now the only challenge with this is actually Because we're making ADFS our conduit into our service, it often becomes, well, it's certainly thought of as then a single point of failure. So often we say, right, well, let's load balance and replicate, or replicate and load balance, in order to mitigate any problems we might have there. So we're instantly talking about throwing a couple of servers down already, and these are on-premise servers. And you think, okay, well, what about the guy who's working from home or from the third-party office? So then you start throwing in a couple of extra servers down in the DMZ, and all of a sudden you start thinking, well, actually, that's all good, but actually what about my secondary site or for any kind of redundancy? And all of a sudden we can grow into this place where we've got a number of servers that we're now deploying on-premise just to consume our online service, and it feels almost counterintuitive. So one of the thoughts, and this by no means the only way, but one of the thoughts is, why don't we host that somewhere? And it just so happens I know a hosting solution available. Why don't we go and host that service elsewhere? And that means we can keep a nice, tidy on-premise environment. It gives us the agility to pass through and have that single sign-on experience with Office 365, and indeed for our external users. And actually, in this example, I put a little read-only domain control up there, which is going to give us a little bit of resilience should anything happen locally. Now, by all means, this is not the only method to do this. There are third parties to provide single sign-on, people like the Okta, or in fact, there's even other services within Microsoft Azure using things like Active Directory and Active Directory Premium that could also facilitate some of this service too. But this is food for thought. Okay, so now let's think about, we've now done all of that, let's think about having a hybrid environment. So this is really where we're looking at Office 365 to provide a single Exchange organization. So we may have, and we're going to use Exchange for this example. You may have a different mail platform currently. For this example, we're going to use Exchange. And what we're saying is we have to find some way of having almost harmony between our existing Exchange environment and the Exchange 2013 environment we're going to see on Office 365. So what we do is we drop in the CAS server within 2013, and actually there's a feature within the CAS server called the Hybrid Configuration Wizard, and that's really what facilitates this notion of a single Exchange organization, irrespective of the fact that one server is up in the cloud and then we have our respective servers here on-prem. So it's really that CAS role that's facilitating that. Now, the only problem we have there is with 2013, there's been no direct upgrade path from 2003. We still have quite a few people who reside in 2003. So Microsoft then took that hybrid configuration wizard and packaged it into what was Service Pack 3 for SharePoint 2010, meaning that we could then say, actually, for anybody with 2003 through 2010, they could utilize the SP3 CAS to facilitate that same hybrid configuration wizard. Now, I appreciate this is getting very technical, and actually I want to pull this back slightly to say a lot of our customers still have 2010, and if you do, you're actually in this golden environment where we can say, because you're already running 2010, we can upgrade that local CAS to SP3 if not already done so, and actually you have the ability to have that single Exchange or hybrid configuration between on-premise and online already. So next down our process, now we have all those users already populated in 365 through our DirSync process. We've set up authentication. We've got a hybrid in place to start moving mailboxes as and when we want. We have to start assigning those licenses. Now, this is a fairly simple process. We can either do this in bulk through PowerShell and the likes of, or we can do this on an individual user basis. So the next important step is really to start thinking about how do we migrate that content. Now, we've talked about a hybrid server and actually deploying and migrating information through the hybrid still seems like a good option, but there are other ways of doing it too. We might want to use an IMAP migration, where this is essentially using an IMAP connection and extract data out of the existing mailbox, and we'll pump that into a new mailbox. There are limitations with IMAP migrations. Typically, they don't take a lot of the mail attributes. They just take things like just take mail data. So we might consider doing something a little bit more advanced, like a cutover migration. This is what we used to refer to as Big Bang. Now, again, this uses the Outlook Anywhere connection to essentially again pull that data and that content out of the existing mailbox and throw it into a new one, and we have a little tool there that Microsoft provides that's going to do that sync of all the delta changes between migration, and effectively go live, we'd flick an MX record and we're over to the new service. We have another option, staged migration. This is often referred to as a simple coexistence. So And it's simple coexistence because often considered more of smoke and mirrors. It's really based upon redirection of mail rather than having a single exchange org. So we won't be able to do that free busy information. We often won't be able to share a gal, things like that. However, we will be able to move batches of users into the new solution and still have many on the existing. So you may say, actually, there are some different options here, but they're still not going to give me quite what we want. And we inevitably end up coming back to this stage where we say, this migration methodology still feels the most appropriate for me. And these are the four main reasons why. We can federate a trust between the on-premise and online environments, giving us the ability to share that calendar information free busy, have a unified GAL, and actually have that single exchange org between the two. We're able to use those same management tools we use currently. We still use the Exchange admin console that we would have on-premise because it's really that on-prem box that's facilitating the hybrid move. Obviously, all our data is going to be secure and encrypted during mail flow and in transit, and it also means that our mailbox stays live irrespective of whether it's in transit, online, or on-premise. We can keep that mailbox live 100% of the time. Now, they're all well and good, but for me, the biggest reason we would consider a hybrid migration is actually the fact that we're doing a native mailbox move. So this is where we're doing a remote mailbox move. And really the value of this is, whilst all the other migration options will copy and put the new content into a new mailbox, that still means that on day one of go live, we've still got all our users trying to download the content of that entire mailbox. So can you imagine 500 users, all with 2 gig mailboxes? On Monday morning at 9 a.m., we're going to start having network problems. With a hybrid migration, because we're moving that mailbox rather than copying and creating, that OST file remains in its entirety. And actually, the impact to the user is nothing more than a simple pop-up that comes in Outlook saying, your systems admin's made some changes, please restart Outlook. And I'm sure many of you have seen that before also. So if for nothing else, hybrid still has its value in that piece alone. So we've now got all our users on there, we've now established a hybrid connection, we've assigned these licenses, content's up there. The last thing is really to only install those client applications, whether it be upgrading your office environment or perhaps something else. Hopefully that gives you a little flavor, if nothing else, of what the migration process looks like. And really, I'll take this opportunity now to ask any questions. And if not, then thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you very soon. Many thanks.